That, then, which mystically is called the fall of man, does not mean, as commonly supposed, the lapse, through a specific act, of particular individuals from a state of original perfection, nor, as sometimes supposed, a change from a fluidic to a material condition. It means such an inversion of the due relations between the soul and the body of a personality already both spiritual and material, as involves a transference of the central will of the system concerned, from the soul, which is its proper seat, to the body, and the consequent subjection of the soul to the body, and liability of the individual to sin, disease, and all other evils which result from the limitations of matter. That, therefore, which mystically is called the redemption, and which is the converse of the fall, does not mean, as commonly supposed, the remission or transference from the guilty to the innocent, of the penalties incurred through the fall. No penalty incurred by man ever is or can be remitted by God, since the divine justice is just. Nor for the same reason can it be borne by another, since a substitution of the innocent for the guilty would in itself be a violation of justice. Wherefore the doctrine of vicarious redemption, as ordinarily accepted, represents a total misconception of the truth, and one derogatory to the divine character. The redemption means such removal of the will of the individual system concerned from the body, and reinstatement of it in the soul, as thenceforth to secure to the soul full control over the body, and to exempt the individual from further liability to transgression. He who is redeemed cannot sin, that is, mortally. It is according to the divine order of nature that the soul should control the body, for as a manifested entity man is a dual being, consisting of soul and body, and of these, in point both of duration and function, and therefore in all respects of value, the precedence belongs to the soul. For the soul is the real, permanent individual, the self, the everlasting, substantial idea, of which the body is but the temporary residence and phenomenal expression. The soul, nevertheless, has, properly speaking, no will of her own, since she is feminine and negative, and she is therefore, by her nature, bound to obey the will of some other than herself. This other can be only the spirit or the body, the within and the above, which is divine and is God, or the without and the below, which taken by itself and reduced to its last expression, is the devil. It is therefore to the spirit and soul as one that obedience is due. Hence, in making the body the seat of the will, the man revolts, not merely against the soul, but against God. And the soul, by participation, does the same. Of such revolt the consequence is disease and misery of both soul and body, with the liability ultimately to extinction of the soul as well as of the body. For the soul which persistently rejects the divine will in favor of the bodily will sins mortally, and becoming mortal, at length dies, for her life is withdrawn, and her constituents are scattered to the elements, so that, without any actual loss either of the life or of the substance of the universal existence, the individuality constituted of them perishes. The quote, man is no more. He that gathereth not with me scattereth. The result, on the other hand, of the soul's steadfast aspiration towards God, the spirit, that is, within her, and of her consequent action upon the body, is that this also becomes so permeated and suffused by the spirit as, at last, to have no will of its own, but to be in all things one with its soul and spirit, and to constitute with these one perfectly harmonious system, of which every element is under full control of the central will. It is this unification occurring within the individual which constitutes the atonement, and in him in whom it occurs, in its fullest extent, nature realizes the ideal to attain which she first came forth from God. For in the man thus redeemed, purified, and perfected in the image of God, and having in himself the power of life eternal, she herself is vindicated and glorified, and the divine wisdom is justified of her children. The process, however, is one which each individual must accomplish in and for himself. For being an interior process, consisting in self-purification, it cannot be performed from without. That whereby perfection is attained is experience, which implies suffering. For this reason, the man who is reborn in us of, quote, water and the Spirit, our own regenerate self, the Christ Jesus and Son of Man, who in saving us is called the captain of our salvation, is said to be made perfect through suffering. This suffering must be borne by each man for himself. To deprive anyone of it by putting the consequences of his acts upon another, so far from aiding that one, would be to deprive him of his means of redemption. There are two senses in which the term fall is used, each of them having relation to an indispensable epoch in the process of the universe. The one is the fall of spirit, the other of the soul. The first occurs in the universal and concerns the macrocosm. The second occurs in the individual and concerns the microcosm. The first and general descent of spirit into matter consists in that original projection of the divine substance from pure being into the condition of existence, whereby spirit becomes matter and creation occurs. The doctrine which regards the universe as the thought of God is a true doctrine. But the universe is not therefore unsubstantial. God is real being, and that which God thinks is also God. Wherefore, in consisting of the thought of the divine mind, the universe consists of the substance of that mind, the substance, that is, of God. God's ideas, like God, are real beings, divine personages, that is, gods. Put forth by, and in a sense divided from, God, in order to accomplish God's purposes, these become messengers of God, that is, angels. And of them, those to whom is assigned a condition below that of God, a condition no longer of spirit, are called, quote, fallen angels. Wherefore, the fall of the angels denotes simply the original and cosmic descent of spirit into the condition of matter, the precipitation, that is, of the divine substance from a state of pure being into the various elements and modes which are comprised in and which constitute existence or creation. Creation is thus not, as ordinarily supposed, a making out of that which is not, but a manifestation or putting forth, by the conversion of essence into things, of that which already is, but which subsists unmanifest. It is true that prior to such manifestation there is no thing, but this is not because there is nothing, but because before things can exist, the ideas of them must subsist. For a thing is the result of an idea, and except as such cannot exist. Thus matter, as the intensification or densification of an idea, is a mode of the divine consciousness put forth through an exercise of the divine will, and being so, it is capable, through an exercise of the divine love, of reverting to its original, unmanifest condition of spirit. The recall of the universe to this condition constitutes the final redemption or, quote, restitution of all things, and it is brought about by the operation of the divine Spirit within the whole. The redemption from the other of the two falls specified is due to the operation of the divine element within the individual, and it is of this alone that we propose to treat on this occasion. As already stated, this fall does not consist in the original investment of the soul with a material body. Such investment, or incarnation, is an integral and indispensable element in the process of the individuation of soul substance, and of its education into humanity. And until perfected, or nearly so, the body is necessary to the soul in turn as nursery, school, house of correction, and chamber of ordeal. It is true that redemption involves deliverance from the need of the body, but redemption itself is from the power of the body, and it is from its fall under the power of the body that the soul requires redemption. For it is this fall which, by involving the alienation of the individual from God, renders necessary a reconciliation or at-one-ment. And inasmuch as this can be effected only through the total renunciation of the exterior or bodily will, and the unreserved acceptance in its place of the interior or divine will, this at-one-ment constitutes the essential element of that redemption, which forms the subject of the present discourse. Although redemption as a whole is one, the process is manifold, and consists in a series of acts, spiritual and mental. Of this series, the part wherein the individual finally surrenders his own exterior will, with all its exclusively material desires and affections, is designated the passion. And the particular act whereby this surrender is consummated and demonstrated is called the crucifixion. This crucifixion means a complete, unreserving surrender to the death, if need be, without opposition, even in desire, on the part of the natural man. Without these steps is no atonement. The man cannot become one with the Spirit within him, until by his passion and crucifixion he has utterly vanquished the old Adam of his former self. Through the atonement made by means of this self-sacrifice he becomes as one without sin, being no more liable to sin, and is qualified to enter, as his own high priest, into the Holy of Holies of his own innermost. For thus he has become of those who, being pure in heart, alone can face God. The Passion and Crucifixion have their immediate sequel in the death and burial of the self thus renounced, and these are followed by the resurrection and ascension of the true immortal man and new spiritual Adam, who by his resurrection proves himself to be, like the Christ, virgin-born, in that he is the offspring not of the soul and her traffic with matter and sense, but of the soul become immaculate, and of her spouse, the Spirit. The ascension with which the drama terminates is that of the whole man, now regenerate, to his own celestial kingdom within himself, where, made one with the Spirit, he takes his seat forever at the right hand of the Father. Although the resurrection of the man regenerate has a twofold relation, in that it sometimes affects the body, the resurrection is not of the body in any sense ordinarily supposed, nor is the body in any way the object of the process. The man, it is true, has risen from the dead, but it is from the condition of deadness in regards to things spiritual, and from among those who, being in that condition, are said to be dead in trespasses and sins. In these two respects, namely, as regards his own past self, and the world generally, he has risen from the dead. And death of this kind has no more dominion over him. And even if he have redeemed also his body, and made of it a risen body, this by no means implies the resuscitation of an actual corpse. In this sense there has been for him no death, and in this sense there is for him no resurrection. It was through misapprehension of the true doctrine, and the consequent expectation of the resurrection of the dead body, that the practice, originally symbolical and special, of embalming the corpse as a mummy became common, and that interment was substituted for the classic and far more wholesome practice of cremation. In both cases, the object was the delusive one of facilitating a resuscitation at once impossible and undesirable, seeing that, if reincarnation be needful, a soul can always obtain for itself a new body. That which constitutes the great work is not the resuscitation of the dead body, but the redemption of spirit from matter. Until man commits what mystically is called idolatry, he has no need of such redemption. So long as he prefers the inner to the outer, and consequently polarizes towards God, the will of his soul is as the divine will, and she has, in virtue thereof, power over his body, as God has over the universe. Committing idolatry by reason of perverse will to the outer, looking back and down, that is, and preferring the form to the substance, the appearance to the reality, the phenomenon to the idea, the city of the plain to the mount of the Lord, she loses this power and becomes a pillar of salt, material and patent to sense, and hence naked. The resurrection body is altogether sublime, being woven for herself by the ascended soul out of elements transcending aught the physical corpse can yield. For it is her own unfallen substance. It is not a body raised, but a raised body. In order to obtain an adequate conception of the vastness of the interval between the conditions of man fallen and man redeemed, it will be necessary to speak yet more particularly of the man perfected and having power. Thus contrasted, the heights and depths of humanity will appear in their true extent. It is but a sketch comparatively slight, which can here be given of what they must endure, who for love of God desire God, and who by love of God finally attain to and become God, and who becoming God without ceasing to be man, become God-man, God manifest in the flesh, at once God and man. The course to this end is one and the same for all, whenever, wherever, and by whomsoever followed. For perfection is one, and all seekers after it must follow the same road. The reward and the means towards it are also one, for the gift of God is eternal life, and it is by means of God, the divine Spirit working within him, to build him up in the divine image, he meanwhile cooperating with the Spirit, that man achieves divinity. In the familiar but rarely understood terms, philosopher's stone, elixir of life, universal medicine, holy grail, and the like, is implied the supreme object of all quest. For these are but terms to denote pure spirit, and its essential correlative, a will absolutely firm and inaccessible alike to weakness from within and assault from without. Without a measure of this spirit is no understanding, and therefore no interpretation of the sacred mysteries of existence. Spiritual themselves, they can be comprehended only by those who have, nay, rather, who are spirit. For God is spirit, and they who worship God must worship in the Spirit. The attainment in himself of a pure and divine spirit is, therefore, the first object and last achievement of him who seeks to realize the loftiest ideal of which humanity is capable. He who does this is not an adept merely. The adept covets power in order to save himself only, and knowledge is for him a thing apart from love. Love saves others as well as oneself, and it is love that distinguishes the Christ, a truth implied, among other ways, in the name and character assigned in mystic legends to the favorite disciple of the Christ's. To Krishna, his Arjun; to Buddha, his Ananda; to Jesus, his John. All terms identical in meaning, and denoting the feminine and tender moiety of the divine nature. He therefore, and he alone, who possesses this spirit in quality and quantity without measure, has and is Christ. He is God's anointed, suffused and brimming with the Spirit, and having in virtue thereof the power of the dissolvent and of transmutation, in respect of the whole man. Herein lay the grand secret of that philosophy which made Hermes to be accounted the trainer of the Christs. Known as the Kabbalistic philosophy, it was a philosophy, or rather a science, based on the recognition in nature of a universal substance, which man can find and affect, in virtue of which he contains within himself the seed of his own regeneration, a seed of which, duly cultured, the fruit is God, because the seed itself also is God. Wherefore, the Hermetic science is the science of God. Christ, then, is primarily not a person, but a principle, a process, a system of life and thought, by the observance of which man becomes purified from matter and transmuted into spirit. And he is a Christ who, in virtue of his observance of this process to its utmost extent, while yet in the body, constitutes a full manifestation of the qualities of spirit. Thus manifested, he is said to destroy the works of the devil, for he destroys that which gives preeminence to matter, and so reestablishes the kingdom of spirit, that is, of God. This, the interior part of the process of the Christ, is the essential part. Whether first or last, the spiritual being must be perfected. Without this interior perfection, nothing that is done in the body or exterior man is of any avail, save only in so far as it may minister to the essential end. The body is but an instrument, existing for the use and sake of the soul, and not for itself. And it is for the soul, and not for itself, that it must be perfected. Being but an instrument, the body cannot be an end. That which makes the body an end ends with the body, and the end of the body is corruption. Whatever is given to the body is taken from the spirit. From this it will be seen what is the true value of asceticism. Divested of its rational and spiritual motive, self-denial is worthless. Rather is it worse than worthless. It is materialistic and idolatrous, and being in this aspect a churlish refusal of God's good gifts, it impugns the bounteousness of the divine nature. The aim of all endeavor should be to bring the body into subjection to and harmony with the spirit, by refining and subliming it, and so heightening its powers as to make it sensitive and responsive to all the motions of the spirit. This it can be only when, deriving its sustenance from substances the purest and most highly solarized, such as the vegetable kingdom alone affords, it suffers all its molecules to become polarized in one and the same direction, and this the direction of the central will of the system, the Lord God of hosts, of the microcosmic man, whose mystic name is Adonai. The reason of this becomes obvious when it is understood that the Christs are, above all things, Medea. But this not as ordinarily supposed, even by many who are devoted students of spiritual science. For, so far from suffering his own vivifying spirit to step aside in order that another may enter, the Christ is one who so develops, purifies, and in every way perfects his spirit, as to assimilate and make it one with the universal spirit, the God of the macrocosm, so that the God without and the God within may freely combine and mingle, making the universal the individual the universal. Thus inspired and filled with God, the soul kindles into flame, and God, identified with the man, speaks through him, making the man utter himself in the name of God. It is in his office and character as Christ, and not in his own human individuality, that the man regenerate proclaims himself, the way, the truth, and the life, the door, and the like. For in being, as has been said, the connecting link between the creature and God, the Christ truly represents the door or gate through which all ascending souls must pass to union with the divine, and save through which no man cometh unto the Father. It is not therefore in virtue of an extraneous obsessing spirit that the Christ can be termed a medium, but in virtue of the spirit itself of the man, becoming divine by means of that inward purification by the life or blood of God, which is the secret of the Christs, and doubled by union with the parent spirit of all, the Father of all spirits. This spirit it is whom the typical regenerate man of the Gospels is represented as calling the Father. It is the unmanifest God, of whom the Christ is the full manifestation. Hence he disavows for himself the authorship of his utterances, and says, "The words which I speak unto you, I speak not of myself. The Father which dwelleth in me, he doeth the works." The Christ is thus a clear glass, through which the divine glory shines, as it is written of Jesus, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Now this only begotten is not mortal man at all, but he who from all eternity has been in the bosom of the Father, namely, the Word, or Logos, the Speaker, the Maker, the Manifestor, he whose mystic name, as already said, is Adonai, and of whom Christ is the counterpart. To attain to the perfection of the Christ, to polarize, that is, the divine spirit without measure, and to become a man of power and a medium for the highest, though open potentially to all, is actually and in the present open, if to any, but to few. And these are necessarily they only who, having passed through many transmigrations and advanced far on their way towards maturity, have sedulously turned their lives to the best account, by means of the steadfast development of all the higher faculties and qualities of man, and who, while not declining the experiences of the body, have made the spirit and not the body their object and aim, aspiring to redemption in himself of each plane of man's fourfold nature. The candidate for Christhood submits himself to discipline and training, the most severe at once physical, intellectual, moral, and spiritual, and rejects as valueless or pernicious whatever would fail to minister to his one end, deeming no task too onerous, no sacrifice too painful, so that he be spiritually advanced thereby. And how varied soever the means, there is one rule to which he remains constant throughout, the rule, namely, of love. The Christ he seeks is the pathway to God, and to fail in the least degree in respect of love would be to put himself back in his journey. The sacrifices, therefore, in the incense of which his soul ascends, are those of his own lower nature to his own higher, and of himself for others. And life itself, it seems to him, would be too dearly bought if purchased at the expense of another, however little or mean, unless indeed of a kind irredeemably noxious, whose extinction would benefit the world. For be it remembered, though always Saviour, the Christ is sometimes also Purifier, as were all his types, the heroes or men regenerate of classic story. Enacting thus, when necessary the executioner's part, he slays for no self-gratification, but in the name of the Lord. They who have trod this path of old have been many, and their deeds have formed the theme of mystical legend innumerable. Epitomizing these, we find that the chief qualifications are as follows. In order to gain power and the resurrection, a man must, first of all, be a hierarch. That is to say, he must have attained the magical age of 33 years, having been, in the mystic sense of the terms, immaculately conceived, and born of a king's daughter, baptized with water and with fire, tempted in the wilderness, crucified and buried, having borne 5 wounds on the cross. He must, moreover, have answered the riddle of the Sphinx. To attain the requisite age, he must have accomplished the 12 labors, symbolized in those of Hercules, and in the sign of the zodiac, passed within the 12 gates of the holy city of his own regenerative nature, overcome the 5 senses, and obtain dominion over the 4 elements. Achieving all that is implied in these terms, his warfare is accomplished. He is free of matter, and will never again have a phenomenal body. He who shall attain to this perfection must be one who is without fear and without desire, save towards God. He who has courage to be absolutely poor and absolutely chaste, to whom it is all one whether he have money or whether he have none, whether he have house and lands, or whether he be homeless, whether he have worldly reputation or whether he be an outcast. Thus is he voluntarily poor, and of the spirit of those whom it is said that they inherit the kingdom of heaven. It is not necessary that he have nothing. It is necessary only that he care for nothing. Against attacks and influences of whatever kind, and coming from whatever quarter without his own soul's kingdom, he must impregnably steel himself. If infortune be his, he must make it his fortune. If poverty, he must make it his riches. If loss, his gain. If sickness, his health. If pain, his pleasure. Evil report must be to him good report, and he must be able to rejoice when all men speak ill of him. Even death itself must account as life. Only when he has attained this equilibrium is he free. Meanwhile he makes abstinence, prayer, meditation, watchfulness, and self-restraint to be the decades of his rosary, and knowing that nothing is gained without toil or won without suffering, he acts ever on the principle that to labor is to pray, to ask is to receive, to knock is to have the door open, and so strives accordingly.